Still waiting Councillors Crowther, J. McElhenney and Nelson.
Okay. You just let me know, Ron, when we're ready to go. That'll be helpful. Okay, I think we've got everyone now present, so welcome everyone, good afternoon to all elected members. Good to see everybody keeping well and nice to see the press here as well. Do we have any apologies, substitutions or declarations of interest?
There are no apologies for absence, and could I ask if there are any declarations of interest, please? Oh, sorry, I see one from Councillor Alfeld there.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. My declaration of interest is in item 18. I have declared it on the chat.
And Convener, if I can just clarify, I've noted Councillor Brooks' declaration. That is a remote interest. Could I just ask Councillor Alfeld, will you go into the lobby, Councillor Alfeld, at that point in item 18?
Yeah, sure. If that's required, I will do that. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Alfeld. Noted.
Just let you realise, Councillor, it's not the Provost. I'm a wee bit. Okay, just to keep it right on that.
Hey, Michael, I've been behind the times for a long number of years.
Okay,
I'm still reeling from the last meeting.
Okay, so item number 2 is the Environment Regeneration Revenue Budget till the 31st of August 2020. Mary, okay.
Yep, thank you, Convener. This first report advises the Committee of the budget position at period 5. The latest projection is an overspend of 2.544 million, and of this overspend, 2.498 million is related to the COVID pandemic. The net position, excluding these costs, is an overspend of 46,000, and you'll see the major variances explained in the report at section 5 and Appendix 3. Appendix 4 provides an update on the Committee's earmarked reserves position. Committee is asked to note the projected overspend and the costs associated with the pandemic for which one-off funding has been agreed. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Any questions or comments for Mary? No? Don't see any. Can we agree the recommendations? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, item number 3 is the Capital Programme 2021 to 22-23 progress report. Mary, you again.
Yep, thank you, Convener. Again, this is a report advised Committee of the current position of the capital programme. The total projected spend is on budget. There is net advancement being reported of 1.704 million, mainly due to advancement in the vehicle replacement programme, and it's relating to refuse collection vehicles, which are now anticipated to be delivered before March. Further details of this and the progress of major projects are detailed in sections 5 to 9 of the report. Committee is asked to note the current position of the programme and the progress in the specific projects, as well as to note and approve detail around the core property services allocation, and that's outlined in recommendations 3.2 to 3.5. Myself and any lead officers will be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks. Okay, any members, any questions for Mary or officers? No? Can we agree with the recommendations? Okay, thank you. Okay, item number 4 is continued business. It's the Wakefield Road / George Road Gourock Junction. Report by the Corporate Director of Environment and Regeneration. Gail.
Thank you, Convener. Committee may recall that a number of options for the Wakefield Road George Road Junction were brought to committee for consideration in January. It was requested that a members' briefing was held. This was held in March, and in item 2.5, officers are recommending 4 options that will go to public consultation for feedback. Happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you, Gail. Any questions on item number 4? No, Ronnie, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Yeah, happy enough with the 4 options, but my question basically is when do we expect them to go to consultation?
Thanks, Ronnie. Gail?
We anticipate that this will go to consultation either immediately post-Christmas, or if we can pull this together in time, because obviously it'll be a virtual consultation, it will go at the start of December.
Okay, any other questions for Gail? No, can we agree the recommendations? Yeah, okay, thank you. Item 5 is a development plan update report. Stuart.
Convener, through you. The report before you has a number of facets which seeks to address policy matters and ironically provides you with our draft consultation response to Scottish ministers in respect of sustainable development. Following the adoption of the 2019 adopted Local Development Plan, Appendix 1 sets out the action programme for the implementation of the policies and proposals in the plan therein. Following the Court of Session decision on our housing chapter and our decision to review the Local Development Plan, Appendix 2 sets out our development plan and participation statement for the new process. Again, as a result of the Court of Session ruling, we need to address the fact that we do not have a housing section in our Local Development Plan, and Appendix 3 sets out a lacuna policy, which, whilst is not of the same standing as an LDP policy, provides my development management colleagues with a policy document. Members, in order for this document to be meaningful, it does have to reflect the Lord's decision, as well as reflect the views of the appellants. Can I give you comfort that the likely time that this policy will be in place is likely only to be 4 to 6 weeks, on the basis that we are presenting our main issues report to a special meeting of the committee in that timescale? I appreciate that the tables are complex, recognising that our position attempts to follow the guidance provided in respect of compound, annualised and combinations of both. It addresses our interpretation of the effective land supply whilst meeting the housing land requirements for all tenures, both within the Inverclyde housing market area and the Renfrewshire housing submarket area. It also talks about affordable housing and recognising that affordable housing has many facets. Again, following the Court of Session decision, Scottish Government have now sought to seek consultation in respect of sustainable development, and Appendix 4 provides members with our suggested response. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Stuart. Okay, now, have we got any questions for Stuart? John Crowther.
Yeah, I just noticed there that on R40, you have Lyle Road, which was formerly the Holy Cross School, and it's a disputed site. Could you give us some more advice on why this is a disputed site? And also with Spangle Valley, I noticed as well, disputed site. Is there any reasons behind that?
Through you, convener, the reason that they're disputed sites is because the developers don't agree with us that they are part of our effective land supply. Recognising, as I said in my introduction, that it's our belief of our effective land supply. The Homes for Scotland and the developers take an approach that says that if a housing site has not been developed within 5 years of it originally being identified in the plan, then it's not an effective housing land supply site, councillor, and that's why they're disputed sites.
Thanks, John. Graham,
Thanks very much. Yeah, item 5, so page 23, it's just a comment that it refers to sheltered housing and care home and nursing homes. There's a need throughout Scotland for retirement and wellbeing housing, and it could strengthen the policy to include retirement and wellbeing housing, but that's simply a comment, and I'll obviously bow to Stuart's professionalism if that is not helpful. But my question on page 24, it refers to significant economic benefits when it's talking about building a greenbelt for like farmland, etc. I just wonder, how is the word significant quantified and measured?
Sure.
Convener, through you, the council has a policy which avoids development on greenbelt. There are, however, circumstances whereby the policy can be overturned, and that would be in the case whereby there is a significant development. So the applicant would need to show an awful lot of economic benefits to us going against our anti-greenbelt policy. So lots of jobs or lots of houses with significant job numbers associated with it, supporting a particular industry. And Councillor Brooks, I can't give you a specific example because each case would be considered under its own merits. And you'll appreciate what I don't want to do is give you a specific answer that says, well, if you press button X, you will be able to build in the greenbelt. You'll recognise that each application is considered under its own merits. And whilst we do avoid development in the countryside, there are circumstances where, with appropriate demonstration, that is the only option. So, for example, tending horses could be an example, but it would need to show that there's scale, that there's no other option.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Stephen McKibb.
Yeah, it was good just to ask Stuart to sort of succinctly explain the difference between the previous housing and communities policy statement and the local development plan and the proposed statement in the report today.
Convener, through you, there is nothing, Councillor McCabe, in the report which hasn't already been in front of members. Probably the most significant element is that we reintroduce the Clyde Plan figures front and centre. You'll recognise that this report does not attempt to address anything in respect of land release. It is simply a lacuna policy to allow my officers to be able to defend applications as it currently stands. So the report simply is a statement of fact, recognising the information which has been presented by the Court of Session. And that is what the purpose of the policy is. It reflects the advice given by the Court of Session. It takes a different approach in respect of housing land supply because we're advised by the Court of Session to follow a particular route. You'll recall from our original proposed plan that we reflected both on an annualised approach as well as a compound approach. The court are specific and tell us what to do, and this is what the policy does state. And we have not sought to release any sites. So it's simply a statement which allows us to say that we do have a housing policy. It reflects the information provided by Clyde Plan, and that is it.
This might be an unfair follow-up question, convener, but I'd ask Mr. Jimison, and he can tell me if he thinks this is unfair, but there have obviously been a number of applications determined on the basis of the previous policy. Would the new policy have had any material impact on officers' recommendations on those previous applications?
Sure.
Convener, unfair question. Convener, just expanding on that a little bit for Councillor McCabe's benefit. You'll appreciate the information which is before an officer or a reporter is based on the information that's current at the time. What we can't do is we can't try and second guess what may or may have not have happened had the information been presented as we have today. I go back to my original comment that the information, there will be people out there who are not happy with our policy as it stands today because they probably don't think that it goes far enough. But we are satisfied that for the timescale that we have and to allow us to progress with a local development plan as we're going through the process as has been set out, this policy gives us a stepping stone.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. Chris Curley.
Thank you, convener. Just maybe a couple of little points of detail. I just would like to just get a wee bit of clarification on. The first one relates to policy A, and I just want to just double check something. We've got policy A, land for housing. It says a requirement for 25% of houses in greenfield development sites in the Inverclyde villages to be for affordable housing. Now, I'm conscious of the fact that this has obviously been in there, probably it's replicating what we had in the previous local development plan. But I'm just wondering, is that sufficient to also cover, does that also cover 25% of houses around Inverclyde villages in the Greenbelt as well? That wording, does that sufficiently cover that? And second of all, there's a point to do with the Regent Street area beside the train station. Just find that again. Where it's identified as previously as a priority project in place, and it's this report identifies that its site's been brought into use as a builder's merchant, and there's currently no action required. Now, I'm just wondering whether or not that is still the case, because from my point of view, I'd have thought that we would expect to try and get a more higher value on that particular site, or our general use that maybe what you call encourage more regeneration than the builders merchant. Of course, it's very, very welcome that the builders is actually expanding, but also they could do that in any particular site, and again, it doesn't necessarily have to be that site. So I'm just wondering whether or not officers feel that is that statement could review that statement, because I'm just wondering, really, do we want to just stop at the builders merchants there, or do we want to look at how that site can be incorporated with the wider development, which is identified as around Dellingburn? Thank you.
Sure.
Convener, you'll recall that the previous policy that was promoted by the council in its local development plan was it was 25% social housing. The reporter in his examination of our local development plan felt that that was not an achievable position to take, and the position was amended to affordable housing, which the committee then subsequently accepted. As I said in my introduction, in my response to Councillor McCabe, there's nothing in this that hasn't been in front of members before. So I believe that the policy as it stands in respect of affordable housing is appropriate. Moving on to the second point with regards to the Regent Street site. Effectively, the site has moved on. So where it was available for where it was identified previously, as a result of the planning consent which has been granted, that has allowed the site to be used as a builder's merchant, and it would not be appropriate for us to revisit that site as a major area of change, unless, of course, the site became vacant.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Ronnie, want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. It's just a very general question on page 29, and it's the very last entry on page 29, F4, the new West Scotland College campus to be identified. So I'm assuming by that no location has been identified, but my question is, have there been any assessments of proposed sites for the new college, and do we expect that there will be any new suggestions forthcoming in the foreseeable future? Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Ronnie. Stuart?
Through you, convener, you'll appreciate that this is a lacuna policy, and what we have to do is we have to act on what information we have just now. I can share with members that there has been engagement with regards to West College Scotland, and the opportunity for West College Scotland to influence our local development plan is through the Call for Sites and Main Issues report, which will be reported to committee in due course.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, sure, thanks. Okay, any other questions? Chris, have you got a supplementary? Yeah, Chris Connor.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, it's just on probably I would have two supplementaries, but I'll just stick to the main one. Is with respect to my question on Greenbelt as opposed to Greenfield. I know it's, I just want just maybe labour the point just slightly. Does the wording that's in policy A also include development around the villages in the Greenbelt for 25% affordable homes?
Sure.
Through you, convener, in this policy it does, yes. Clearly the local development plan going forward may or may not have that same status.
Okay, that's sure. Jim McElhenney.
Thanks, convener. Going back to the Regent Street regarding the building merchants, I was under the impression that was only an interim solution that were granted them planning to use. Subsequently, a planning application for a small garage forecourt car sales type thing was refused, and then subsequently again a planning application for a garage stroke forecourt was approved under delegated authority. Can I just get a bit more clarity on the particular issues, please, Stuart?
Convener, I'm happy to take that conversation offline. You'll recognise that this is a specific policy document as opposed to a specific site, but I'm happy to have that conversation with Councillor McElhenney offline.
Okay, good, John. Jerry Malone, did you want to come in?
Not me, convener. I was just making sure that Councillor McElhenney's question was picked up. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Okay, any other member? Okay, can we agree the recommendations?
Councillor Nelson has a question, convener.
Hello, convener. It was to ask a question to Stuart. On page 29, right at the top, it says Leven Farm is a disputed site. I take it that's the area that was released from the Greenbelt years ago and hasn't been developed. And I just wondered what the situation was with that. And also with Bridgend Inverkip, there's been no movement to build the houses at Bridgend Inverkip. And I just wondered what the position was there as well.
Sure.
Convener, both sites, same answer as I gave to Councillor Crowther. Because they're disputed, it's the developers who dispute them. It's not anyone else disputing them. We believe that they're effective land supply.
Are you okay with that, Alice?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? No? Can we agree with recommendations? Thank you. Okay, item number 6 is the greenhouse gas emission reporting and achieving net zero. Stuart, you again.
Convener, through you. Local authorities are required to report annually on their performance with respect to climate change under the Public Bodies Duties section of the Climate Change Scotland Act 2009. The Council has been reducing its carbon emissions on year on year, and in 1920 this was 10,212 tonnes, which represents a reduction of 46.5% on the 2012-13 figures. Convener, the Scottish Government is proposing regulations requiring public sector bodies achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions and are looking for a date for that. And we are seeking authority to engage suitably qualified consultants to be engaged as to explain to us how we might achieve this through an appropriate study with a spend of up to £100,000 from the earmarked reserve. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Chris, did you want to come in, Chris Curley?
Yes, Convener, thank you. Obviously, I welcome the national strategy for net zero to 2045, and obviously, I just wanted to get an impression from officers whether or not how they felt the national drive to making renewables would feed into our net zero target, because obviously there's a certain amount. I presume there's a certain amount we will never actually be able to actually get net zero when we actually gets in. We're not going to be generating electricity and using biomass and all that sort of stuff within our own buildings, or maybe we are. So I'm just wondering where do you think that the net zero, where the significant proportion of that's going to be? Is it going to be within ourselves as an organisation, or is it going to be more at a regional or national level?
Thanks, Chris. Sure.
Convener, the net zero target is an extremely challenging target. However, we would hope to align our programmes and how we may achieve that through the programme for government. That's the purpose of the study. And Councillor Curley is absolutely correct. The likelihood of us being able to achieve all of it through our own mitigation is unlikely. However, that's where there will be other factors which will be brought to bear. And we would expect that the study would highlight that to us. Clearly, the study is twofold. It's about how can we achieve net zero and when can we achieve net zero.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Drew, did you want to come in? You're on mute, Drew.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, £100,000 seems an awful lot for a study to tell us how to reduce our carbon emissions, because we seem to know how to do that already. I refer to page 186 of your agenda today, where it's the Corporate Director's Asset Management Strategy. Now, in the Climate Change Plan, it lists a whole list of ideas of how to reduce our carbon emissions. And if I could look at the first, it says it notes the Council's climate change performance, particularly with regard to the reduction of carbon emissions. And in our minutes for item 6, it says it's been reduced by 46.5%, as announced by Mr. Jimison there. But in the Corporate Director's Asset Management Strategy, the last line says, since the financial year 2007-2008, the baseline year for climate change plan, the Council has reduced its carbon emissions by 19%. There's something not right there. Am I reading this wrong?
Sure.
Through you, Chair. The purpose of the £100,000 study is because up until now, we've achieved our emissions through initiatives delivered by the Council, but they've effectively been low-hanging fruit, Councillor Mackenzie, in comparison with the scale that's required to be able to achieve net zero. So we will not be able to use efficient gas boilers, for example. We will have to be looking at alternative heat sources. We're going to have to look at this fundamentally in respect of how we make step change to be able to achieve net zero. The Council officers and colleagues who are around the table, I'm sure will support me in this, do not have the expertise to be able to take this to net zero, and that is why we're seeking external guidance on this, nor do we have the capacity to be able to do it. So therefore, it's very much a fundamental study which seeks to identify how we can make step change in our vehicles, or on the vehicle in which we achieve a net zero outcome. With regards to the comments on page 186, I'll have to take them offline and come back. I'll update members accordingly.
Okay, thanks, John. Graham, did you want to come in? Graham Brooks?
Yeah, thanks very much. In the report, Stuart, it does say that the Scottish Government is proposing to do regulations, but in your commentary, you said that they are actually now asking us to, to do what this report is asking. So obviously, if the Scottish Government has already instructed us, then my question falls. If the Scottish Government may ask us, then my question is it premature to spend 100,000?
Convener, through you, the Scottish Government has asked us when we will achieve a net zero target, and indeed some neighbouring authorities have identified when they will achieve a net zero target. So the end date, if you like, is 2045. However, there is an expectation that we'll achieve that before then. But that, again, will come back from the study.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Stephen?
Yeah, I mean, just following on from that and previous questions, I mean, Councillor Brooks will actually, I'm sure, recall that as part of the budget process, we did actually take a policy decision and allocate a sum of money that we wanted to significantly reduce the council's carbon footprint. And I think initially we allocated £500,000, but in light of COVID and the review of the reserves, that sum was reduced. And I'm presuming that's the earmarked reserve that Stuart's asking for £100,000. So I suppose the challenge to Stuart, along with the previous challenges, is why is there greater benefit from spending £100,000 on a piece of consulting, which on the face of it is a lot of money, rather than spending that £100,000 on actual practical measures to reduce the council's carbon footprint. So it's about the value for money in terms of how practical and detailed are we expecting this study to be, that actually spending £100,000 will represent value for money.
Convener, through you, it's a matter of scale. So in order for us to achieve this level of reduction, it's about doing things completely differently. It's about, rather than using electric vehicles, it could be using hydrogen vehicles, for example. It's about using district heating systems. It's about using alternative heat sources that provide the opportunity for us to significantly reduce our carbon emissions. As I said earlier, we have been very successful up until now, but it's been things that have been within our gift to deliver, as opposed to where we have the capacity to deliver. The scale that's associated with some of these reductions are multi-million in some cases, and this is something which we need to understand fully in order how we can achieve this. We can't just go and plant acres and acres of trees in order to get a net zero. So in respect of the expectations from the study, it's my expectation will be, if you do X, you will achieve Y. And if you don't do this, here's another way of doing it. So you'll appreciate I don't come before committee very often seeking £100,000 worth of consultant costs, but we need help to be able to do this, and we need serious help to be able to do this.
No, and I appreciate that, Stuart, but if we agree to commit up to £100,000 of resources today on that, then we as elected members expect to see a serious payback on that in terms of a high quality report with practical measures that can be implemented cost effectively to make that sea change. We don't want a high level falutin strategy with a lot of recommendations that are just no practical.
Totally agree with you, Councillor McCabe.
Okay. Any other member want to come in? No? Can we agree with the recommendations? Thank you. Okay, item number 7 is the Spaces for People, Cycling, Walking and Safer Roads report. Gail.
Thank you, Convener. This report sets out the proposed cycling, walking and wheeling infrastructure projects proposed for this financial year to be delivered by funding gained from Space for People and Cycling, Walking, Safer Streets. We have been awarded £585,000 from Space for People and £345,000 from Cycling, Walking, Safer Streets. A public consultation was held and we asked for ideas and for issues that members of the public were experiencing in relation to being out and about during the COVID period. And the feedback is detailed in item 4.7. This, in addition to another members' briefing, has shaped the proposal set out in 4.8 and 4.9. There is, in addition to an amendment to this report, in the section between Gourock, Lunderson Bay and Battery Park, no longer be proposing to widen the promenade as a permanent feature or create a temporary cycle route on the south side of Albert Road at the flats as a temporary. This could be replaced by clearly defining the on-street section past the flats on Albert Road between the pool and the promenade. So this route will deliver a dedicated route from Gourock to Port Glasgow. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Gail. I think first up is Ronnie Alfield.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, thanks, Gail. We had an excellent discussion with officers about our part of Inverclyde, the 4.8, the Gourock Lunderson Bay to Battery Park. It was absolutely first class in terms of what we proposed, how the consultation looked, and basically how we would like to shape it. And I think it went exceptionally well. So my question is basically, how do we intend to communicate exactly what has been agreed? Will these points be clearly spelled out to the general public? And I guess my last question is, are they really a fait accompli at this point in time?
Yeah.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Councillor. We would be proposing to do a period of communications out to members of the public. Part of the funding allows for softer measures such as communication to encourage people to be aware of the measures being put in place, but also the correct way to use the measures and use the infrastructure. So to encourage people to use it appropriately. We would be proposing that, yes, this would be the final proposals that we would be delivering on site.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Chris Curry.
Thank you, Convener. All members would not be surprised to learn to actually support these proposals. I think generally, though, they are the very start of what we need to do in Inverclyde from this point of view, because we do need to move to getting more segregated cycle lanes, cyclist soft pavements, and onto sharing the roads safely with what they call with cars, etc. What I was wondering though is timescales here. I know there's a few things we want to be doing what they call quicker, the low hanging fruit, etc., especially around Battery Park, the Esplanade, etc., and into Laird Street and Greenock. You can understand that should be relatively easy to get done. But the thing that's really, I'm saying we're looking at to get one between Gourock and Port Glasgow. But between Greenock and Port Glasgow, we've got a real big issue, and it's not really talked about in this report about how we address the getting people cycling safely along the A8 corridor between Greenock and Port Glasgow, and what sort of timescales we're talking about to get there, because that's as a Port Glasgow councillor, I think that's a key one. How we actually get people safely along that corridor without them having to climb up the top of the hill and climb back down again.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Convener. I'm happy to take that offline and to share an indicative timeline that the officers are developing and will finalise if we are approved through the report.
Okay, thanks, Gail. Stephen?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I mean, I have to say I'm incredibly impressed by the typing speed of Councillor Brooks. It's almost he's cutting and pasting into the chat. But one of the issues I raised at the briefing was the existing cycle route track along the old railway line between Port Glasgow and Bridge of Weir. And I know Councillor Curley wants to reinstate that as a railway line and lose that important asset to our community. Well, you want to build a new cycle path along the route of the railway line. But the point I raised was about the usage of that route, and it has significantly increased during the COVID pandemic. But that people don't really understand the protocols of cycling and walking along a cycle route, and that really we should be assisting them by telling them what side they should be cycling on, what side they should be walking on. And I don't see anything in the report, particularly under paragraph 4.9, the additional measures that sort of address that particular issue, because that's an issue which is happening as we speak. Well, maybe not, it's teeming with rain up here at the moment, but it's certainly an issue that needs to be addressed. And I think it's something that could be introduced relatively quickly and at relatively little expense.
Yeah, Gail?
Yep. Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Councillor. Yes, propose as part of this is to put in softer measures, and a lot of that is communication, it is signage, and putting out through our community groups as well the appropriate use of the infrastructure, and that includes the use of areas like that through parks and through the old railway line as well. So they are locations that have been identified that require that communication.
Okay, thanks, Gail. Graham, do you want to come in? I'll let you read your questions out yourself, Graham.
Yeah, thanks very much, Convener. Yes, Gail, so a few questions on this paper. We welcomed the Dalrymple Street parking, which was fantastic. Shopkeepers are loving it, but you're proposing to take it away from us. So why? And is there a comment on that one? Battery Park, when it looks at 4.8, the cycle route from Battery Park through to Greenock. There's a proposal there in the report that says that you want to add not just painting on the ground, but obviously physical bollards. I think the Roads Department would agree. I'm constantly nipping them as I'm being nipped by constituents with the amount of street furniture that Inverclyde is asking. So are the bollards actually required? And if not, can we get away with doing this new proposal without physical street furniture? 4.9 talks about narrowing the footpaths to create a one-way for pedestrian. I don't understand that. I'm just asking for a narrative on that one-way system for pedestrians, or what that actually means. And finally, at 4.9, talked about changing the pedestrian crossing rather than predicting the traffic will actually be stopped rather than pedestrians. I'm sure you have, but has the traffic impact been done on that? How will it affect the actual flow of traffic? And just for my divulgence, is there anywhere in Inverclyde that we already have that, where the pedestrian has the priority, and it's actually when the traffic approach, then it changes the traffic lights?
Okay, Gail, you want to work your way through them?
Yes, thank you. I'll try and cover everything. So in relation to Dalrymple Street, the parking was temporary in relation to replacing parking that we had proposed to remove from West Blackhall Street. That parking has been retained, and this is a temporary increased number of parking spaces to support access to the shops while people are not using public transport. As the use of public transport increases again, upon the appropriate guidance from the Scottish Government at that appropriate time, we would look to reduce that parking, because we would look to encourage people to access the town centre through accessible and sustainable means, through active travel, bus and train. The bollards at Battery Park, the bollards are only proposed where they are appropriate. We're trying to reduce the amount of street furniture as much as possible. However, at some locations, it is required to be able to provide that differentiation between the different users and to ensure that we're encouraging people to be in the appropriate space and have that social distancing able to be provided. In relation to the one-way, this is looking at where we have people using cycling and walking in the one area and looking to see where it would be appropriate to use some of that space for cycling, but to allow people to have areas to walk that's purely for walking. So we would be identifying locations where we've currently got a conflict, perhaps with people walking both directions, and we need to look at a one-way system, or where we've got cyclists and people walking in the same location, and we need to look at splitting those and encouraging people to be in a separate dedicated area. So those would be developed as and when appropriate. In relation to the traffic flows and assessing any delay to traffic, as locations are identified that should have increased pedestrian due to desire, that would be done on a localised basis. So if there is an area that's, say, a key link to, say, Greenock Town Centre, and we were looking at increasing the possibility of increasing pedestrian timing on a signal, we would then look at that local area and look at what that effect may be. And it may not be appropriate to put in that increased pedestrian because of the effect that might have on the surrounding road network. So that would be part of that assessment.
Convener, may I go back in the supplementary?
Yeah, okay, Graham.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Gail. Thanks very much for a full explanation. If I go back to my first question, 2.4, so the council has a temporary parking on Dalrymple Street, and your narrative says that that would be reversed at appropriate time. At what stage would members have the right to agree or disagree with that, or would you like me to take that up with Scott? Is there a space on future agendas for members to have an opinion?
Thank you, Councillor. The appropriate time would be based on when people would be encouraged and able to use public transport again. At the moment, we're encouraging people to use public transport through the Scottish Government guidance only for essential journeys. So as that started to change and the guidance changed as we moved out of that, that would be the appropriate time when we would then bring an update report to committee to make members aware of the timing of that.
Okay, so just to clarify, and maybe Jenny can help me here, so members will have an opportunity to make that permanent at a later stage.
Jerry, would you like to come in on that?
Convener, I thought that was Gail's advice, that there was a subsequent opportunity to do that, but that's what I was taking from that. Could Gail please confirm that to me?
Yep, so we would be bringing forward at the appropriate time when we would be proposing to remove the temporary parking at Dalrymple. To be clear, we are not proposing to remove all the new parking at Dalrymple Street. There's an element that would be retained. So in essence, the parking at West Blackhall Street will be enhanced by an increased element of parking on Dalrymple Street. However, we would not be proposing to retain all the additional parking on Dalrymple Street.
So that would come back to committee then, Convener, as part of any TRO procedure. That is how I would understand that.
Okay, thanks for that. Stephen, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to come in on that particular point, and I can understand why Councillor Brooks is raising it. I don't often get to the big smoke these days, but I was in Greenock on Saturday, and I have used that temporary parking on a few occasions over the COVID period. I mean, it's clear to me in the early days it wasn't causing any issues, and it was beneficial. But to me, on Saturday, it does constrain the flow of traffic along Dalrymple Street, whether it's a good or bad thing. So I'm not saying it all should be taken away or it should all be left. I think there is a discussion to be had, and I think there is a role for consultation with members on this issue before, because I mean it was an operational decision effectively to put it in place in the first place, and you could argue it's an operational decision to remove it, but I think there is merit in having a discussion with members on it, but I think we need to look at the pros and the cons of it.
Yeah. Okay, any other member want to come in? No? Can we agree recommendations? Yeah. Okay, thanks. Okay.
Convener, just to confirm, Convener, forgive my interruption there. Just to confirm, Gail's advice, just for the purpose of the minute, was to drop 2 items from the Lunderston Bay Battery Park list. That's the widening of the prom permanently and the temporary cycle route. So for the minute, I'd have to take that in and drop those as the proposals from 4.8. I'm just wanting to make sure that's okay with the committee.
Are we okay with that? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, thanks for that, Gerard. Okay, item number 8 is the road naming report. Stuart.
Convener, through you, the purpose of this report is threefold. It seeks to introduce a policy for the road naming process as identified in pages 55 to 64 of your agenda, which hopefully provides a really comprehensive policy in terms of all of the situations that could prevail. It seeks to identify a proposal for the housing development at T Street, and it also reports on the remitted item for the road naming in the former St Stephen's site. The meeting between the ward members did take place. The names are set out in paragraph 5.6, and Councillor Curley wished it noted that he was not in full support of all of the names as I reported within the papers. Happy to take any questions.
Okay. Any comments or questions from Stephen? Do you want to come in, sorry?
Councillor Curley's dissent was duly noted at the time, but democracy prevailed and the majority opinion prevailed in that particular matter. But just in respect to 5.2 and the 4th bullet point from the end, where we're talking about avoid naming roads after people who are still living or recently deceased, and then brackets with that. Now, I have to say, I'm fine with not naming roads after people who are still living. I could accept the argument potentially around recently deceased, but 20 years to me seems a rather lengthy period of time, to be perfectly honest. And there have been quite a number of names, even prior to the ones that have been agreed for the development of Port Glasgow, been quite a number of roads named after individuals in my time as a councillor, and I can't think of many, if any, of those where the person was deceased 20 years. So I'm not comfortable with 20 years. I'm not necessarily sure that we do need a stipulation of 20 years or not, or even 5 or 10 or whatever. But I'm not comfortable with a blanket. We won't name it after somebody unless they're dead more than 20 years.
Stuart.
Convener, you'll recognise that this is a suggested policy and happy to take any recommendations from the committee.
Okay, any other thoughts? John Crowther.
Okay, actually, thank you. I'm just going to add a wee bit there about the naming. I'm actually quite happy with the proposals that have been put forward by officers. And the bit that's actually disappointing is insofar as you're going down the line of previous councillors. I do note that they've only mentioned surnames on this. There's no forenames, but I think there's really, from memory, with Cathy Allen Place, I don't know whether Cathy, when she actually passed away and the street was named after her, we also had John Campbell in Gourock as well, Councillor John Campbell. But we did have a policy when it was the 3 local boroughs, Gourock, Greenock, Port Glasgow, where many of the street names were named after province. We also had it where they were named after bailies and magistrates, but very little in the way of naming after councillors. also, the councillors' names that are mentioned, I'm not aware what association they have with that particular ward in Port Glasgow, where we had the likes of Claude Coxon. Now, did Claude not actually represent the Larkfield area? He may have lived in Port Glasgow, I'm not sure. But I'm actually disappointed with this. But I will accept the democratic decision that was taken, although Councillor Curley, I'm not entirely happy with it, but I basically have to accept this.
Okay, Chris Curley, do you want to come in?
Yeah, you'd be pleased to know I'm not going to discuss the actual names at the St Stephen's site. That decision has been made. I suppose that I'm just maybe touching upon what Stephen said with respect to the 20 years. I suppose it's all about making sure there's enough time to demonstrate the, what do you call it, who are naming enough time to review the legacy, I suppose, before naming a street after somebody. But my take from it is guidance, and obviously guidance is there to guide, but not for extreme obedience. There always will be, I presume, a little bit of flexibility depending on the situations as time arises. But the officers would be tempted to work to this guidance when preparing names for consideration by councillors. That's my view on it. I'll just be interested to understand if that's the Stuart's view on it as well.
Okay, Chris, thanks for that. Dennis Nelson, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I think I agree with Councillor McCabe here that I don't think we should be tied to this 20-year thing. And I suppose an example is Douglas Ray, which Chris Curley, I think, initially put forward. So, you know, I think it's silly to tie councillors to this. I just don't see the reason for it.
Thanks, Dennis. Jim, do you want to come in? Jim McMahon?
Yeah, thanks, convener. It's just picking up on Councillor Crowther's comments about the second names. I mean, it's fine for our generation, for want of a better description, that we may well know some of these stalwarts, key community activists, etc., councillors. But in the years to come, the younger generations coming up behind us will look at some of these names and saying, yeah, that name, that's Pat Stanton, used to play for Hibs. Eddie Morrison used to play for Morton. Yeah, that's good that name's named after him. So I would have liked to have seen the full name so that people could do a bit of research or that kind of thing.
Stephen?
Yeah. Thanks for letting me back in. I mean, I think in respect of the initial point I raised, which was about not ruling out people who are recently deceased, I would certainly move that we delete that from the intended policy. But just to respond to a couple of points that have been made there, in terms of Councillor Crowther, actually, we had a detailed report to a previous meeting of the committee, might have been the previous meeting of the committee, which outlined the background in each of these individual councillors and what wards that they represented, and they all have a connection to Port Glasgow and in that particular area of Port Glasgow as well, the vicinity of that. But I mean, this is a housing development by River Clyde Homes, obviously. And there is no reason to pick up the second point about explaining who these people are to future generations and the second names. There's no reason why we couldn't either fund or ask River Clyde Homes to fund, as part of the development, a small plaque at each location explaining who the street is named after and what their background is. It'd be a relatively small plaque. So I think that's a perfectly sensible way to address the concerns that have been raised.
Yeah, okay. Any other member want to come in? Are we in agreement with Stephen's suggestions of the plaque?
Yeah. Convener, can I just come back on that, please? Yeah, it's an ideal suggestion that Stephen's making there, and I think that could maybe be adopted into the policy, that any future names, future new roads, we could have a similar type thing if it does have a prominent historical link to previous people. So I don't know if that can get written into the policy or not.
So is our intention to incorporate that and drop the 20-year mention of an agreement with that as well? Okay.
Sorry, convener. Just for clarity, so what we're proposing then is just to remove the within brackets bit. So within the past 20 years, close brackets.
Yes, convener, that's how I understand it too.
Well, actually, convener, I mean, my proposal would be to delete that part altogether. So it would simply be avoid naming roads after people who are still living.
Gerard, are you okay with that?
It's a decision of the committee, convener.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I just
with that as well?
Can I have a late comment to make on that particular aspect? What happens if we actually get somebody like Sir Chris Hoy in the future years, and we want to obviously like a golden postbox or something of a similar ilk? Would that not be a valid thing to name a street after somebody that's still living, that is a, I don't know, multi award winner, gold medalist type person in the future?
I'm sure Jimmy Savile would have got a lot of roads named after him in that case.
What's the committee's thoughts on that?
I think that's a legitimate thing, but I think we could cross that bridge if we come to it, to be perfectly honest. I mean, if there are circumstances like that, it could be a one-off.
Yeah. So Gerard, would you like to try and summarise that? The comments.
Convener, I think that the summary would be this, that the bullet point is avoid naming roads after people who are still living, and where appropriate and if possible, to arrange for suitable interpretation boards or devices in association with developments.
Okay, can we be in agreement with that? Yeah. Okay.
Convener,
okay.
Sorry, Convener, just to add to Mr Malone's comment there, where naming a street after a person, as opposed to seeking to put a storyboard up for every street name that we develop.
No. Yeah, you don't need to explain what an osprey is.
Right, okay, we have to agree with that.
Robin.
Right, okay, swiftly moving on, thanks. Item number 9 is a residence parking permit scheme expansion. Newton Street, Inverkip Street to Nelson Street. Gail.
Thank you, Convener. This report sets out a proposal to extend residence parking permits to Newton Street between Inverkip Street and Nelson Street. This is in response to issues raised by residents in this area who are experiencing difficulty parking, and officers have determined the extent of restriction to be introduced at this time, but this will be monitored. And I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, thanks, Gail. Any comments, or can we agree on the recommendation?
Convener, I have a comment in the chat. So as a comment, just to make sure that we use the minimum number of signage that's required to meet the legislation. Again, as previously said, the number of street furniture is increasing and constituents are asking questions.
Okay, can I be taken into account, Gail? Yeah, okay. Jim Cockerty.
Yeah, just a very quick comment. I'm supportive of this. My only comment was that we shouldn't get into a situation where we do things ad hocly. You know, this is a sort of ad hoc bolt on. If we're making changes, we should do it from a sense of an overarching sense of we're looking at a particular area and then a report comes back for that area, rather than doing things ad hocly. This seems a wee bit ad hoc, rather than looking at a particular area and seeing overarching from the area what is the right thing to do. But other than that, I've got no issue with the actual proposal itself.
Okay. Any other member want to come in? Okay, so can we agree on recommendations? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, item number 10 is a proposed traffic regulation order for disabled persons parking places. Standard report. Gail, anything to add?
No, nothing to add.
No, okay. Any member want to come in? No. Can we agree on recommendations? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Item 11 is benches to mark the effort by the NHS, key workers and volunteers during COVID. Scott.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, this is a short report which proposes 3 commemorative benches. It is based on something that was piloted in Hull. I think a number of councils have taken this up. And it involves benches with the words that we would propose would be thank you NHS, key workers and volunteers stencilled in the back, and these benches would be in NHS blue. And there are locations shown in the appendix, the general locations in each town, with a recommendation from officers that the committee approves the benches and the option 1. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Any questions on what is a positive report? No? Sorry, Chris Cully.
Thank you, Convener. I think everybody. I don't speak to everybody. I think this is a great idea and a great way of locally, what do you call it, recognising the great services for the NHS key workers volunteers during COVID, and obviously we're still going through that process at the moment in the middle of our second wave. What I was wondering was obviously there's £5,000 per bench, and obviously it's a big headline number for a bench, and I was wondering whether or not the officers would be able to give some advice about that, and also whether or not they think that this is something that would maybe be able to be sourced locally, and if they'd be able to identify or be able to make sure that local companies would be able to take part and be able to make this bespoke furniture, or have the opportunity to tender for it, and it's not what they call something that's maybe done elsewhere.
Scott.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, in the first instance, we could do a tender exercise that's limited locally, and ideally, the local market would respond to that.
Okay, thank you. Graham Brooks.
Yeah, thanks for it. I think Stephen was first, but if Stephen lets me, I'll continue. Okay, thanks for it, Stephen. I see that hand. The wording proposed is obviously fantastic, but in 10, 15 years' time, there's no reference to the COVID pandemic. And some people may be thinking, great, we're thanking volunteers, but I wonder if there's been any thought through about whether we should link it back to this unprecedented time of COVID-19. And secondly, is there an opportunity to put a QR code in? We live in a digital world, and the QR code would take people to, I don't know what, maybe a COVID website that tells the history, or would maybe take it to obviously one of our own Inverclyde Life websites, which would give people the opportunity to volunteer for the future in Inverclyde. A QR code be added.
Scott.
Thank you, Convener. We can certainly look at adding in a QR code. In terms of what will happen in 10, 15 years' time, it's hard to predict. I think my sense is that the gravity of this is something that will not be forgotten for many decades. But this is something that we're proposing, and there will be another commemorative feature as part of the budget that was allocated from the Policy and Resources Committee. So it may be the larger commemorative feature could have more kind of detail and background on it.
Okay. Stephen?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I do welcome this report. It was myself who stole the idea from Hull in the first place. I don't mind stealing ideas from other places. I mean, I think members have made legitimate points. I think if we can get the benches sourced locally, if we can think about potentially sort of in some way explaining why they're there, I suppose. But I tend to agree with Scott that this is such a global event, and unfortunately may not be the last pandemic that we have to deal with. But I was also going to make the point that Scott's made, we separately are looking at some sort of memorial garden to commemorate and remember the people who've sadly lost their life as part of this pandemic. So this is not just a sort of the only sort of memorial in a sense there will be connected with this pandemic. It's part of I suppose a wider plan to remember this most significant event in all our lives.
Stephen.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I think Stephen stole my thunder there. It was my initial question was to see if we could incorporate some form of plaque to say in memory of those who tragically lost their lives. But if there's going to be a separate commemoration garden or whatever, then I'm happy with that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Innes?
Thank you, convener. It does. £5,000 a bench does seem a bit high, you know, and hopefully locally they could be procured a lot cheaper than that. But what I was going to say was the villages here seem to have been kind of forgotten in this. I would quite like to have seen one in Wimsby, one in Inverkip, and one in Kilmacombe as well, if the price could be brought down a bit.
Scott?
Thank you, convener. We're at the direction of the committee here. The £5,000 cost is what we believe it'll cost for a bench that's in stainless steel that will have the durability. They are handmade, so the stenciling on the back will be hand cut and then set in concrete in a location, so that there is a significant cost against that type of bench. We did consider getting a cheaper kind of bench that could be in timber or reconstituted plastic, as it was a common one now, but didn't feel that it would be durable enough or the material was appropriate for the commemoration. So my advice would be that 5,000 is a reasonable estimate for an individually crafted bench. We then need to look at the budget if we went from 3 benches, say, to 6 benches.
Stephen, did you want to come in? Stephen?
Yeah, I was saying the officers can be pretty frugal with the money. It is after all public money, and you've got to be aware of that. And I think it's a perfectly legitimate challenge to make, but we obviously wouldn't just be talking about adding Inverkip and Winsby and Kilmacombe. Quarries Village is obviously a settlement in Inverclyde. So I'm happy for officers to explore the costs of providing a bench in each of the main settlements and looking to see if they can accommodate that within budgets. If not, then obviously they potentially can come back and look for additional funding.
Okay, can we agree on that, everyone? Yeah. Okay. Okay, thanks for that. Okay, thanks very much, everyone, for agreeing with recommendations. Item number 12 is the Comet replica, the condition survey. Scott, do you want to come in first?
Thank you, convener. Yes, I'm just going to give a bit of background to this report, some of which is in the content of the report and some of which is additional information. So the report sets out the background to the vessel. It is a replica. It was made in 1962, launched in 1962, and then taken out of the water, and it's been a standing exhibit ever since, but not always in the same location. And it's always been an outside exhibit. There was a major refurbishment carried out in 2009, as identified in the paper, and I believe that was completed in 2010, and the vessel was restored back to Port Glasgow. This committee considered a paper in May 2013 and allocated £143,000 towards putting a canopy on the vessel. And the canopy involved a rain protection above the vessel, but with the mast sticking through it. And the committee approved that at that time. But in March 2014, we as officers received advice from, at that time, Ferguson Marine, who advised that they recommended against the canopy an expenditure of that amount of money, and recommended instead a tarpaulin system on the deck, which we typically have on lifeboats or boats that are being stored over the winter time. So officers brought back a report to committee, and the committee agreed not to install a full canopy, but instead to put the tarpaulin on as was approved by the committee. And this work was completed in 2016, combined with a lot of cosmetic work such as painting of the hull. The current study was agreed to the budget in 2018, commissioned in 2019, received by the council at the end of 2019, and was due to come to this committee, but of course was prevented by COVID. The detail of the report doesn't make good reading, there's no question about that. There's substantial deterioration in the vessel, primarily in the large planking, but also in the oak frame of the vessel in places. And the advice is that the hull needs to be recreated, but many of the components can be put back into a new hull, and it's advised that's the most cost-effective way to do it. There are different ways this can be done. We've taken advice from two experts in shipbuilding. One of them quoted a figure of recreating the vessel in its entirety for up to £750,000. And that's a figure that's been quoted in the press. But we have another quote that suggests the same job could be done for £250,000. The key thing is that there needs to be a long-term strategy for the vessel, and we're recommending that through the Port Glasgow Regeneration Forum, we have a working group working with officers to look at options. The early advice that we're getting from industry experts is that it is possible to create a vessel that is fully weatherproof, that could be displayed outside without the need for canopies. But that is something that would have to be costed and looked at in detail and be one of the options considered by the working group. So if members are minded, then that is the way that officers would recommend that this project is taken forward.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Stephen, do you want to come in first?
Yeah, thanks, convener. I mean, this is a bit of a sorry tale. I mean, that's the reality of it, and I think Scott has rehearsed some of the history. I mean, I certainly didn't anticipate when I went to view the replica in Ferguson shipyard and saw the scale of the work that was being undertaken on it, and then when I watched it come out of Ferguson shipyard and back to the centre Port Glasgow, I didn't think that around 10 years later we would be at this stage. So I suppose that there is that challenge, and that's the implied criticism, I suppose, of the council as a body, that in some way we have failed to preserve and protect this important historic artefact, albeit as a replica of a ship that sunk off Oban many years before. And I think it is important we ask the question around, did we make the wrong decisions in terms of not putting the canopy up? And could we have done more between the point that the canopy, the terminal cover or whatever it's called, was put on and the painting was done in 2016 to now to have prevented the hull getting into this condition? So obviously that's seeking to learn lessons. Going forward, I agree with the suggestion for the Port Glasgow Regeneration Forum to look at this and to try and come up with what we see as the best way forward. But I mean, the potentially whatever solution, it's going to be a costly solution, so no doubt about that, and we're going to come up against challenges if we've come up against in terms of investing money in, for example, the statue in Port Glasgow, and we'll get the usual people saying that's a waste of money when all the other issues that we need to face. To me, this is an important asset, an important symbol of the town's heritage and indeed Inverclyde's heritage, albeit, again, I keep reiterating it's a replica which is 58 years old. And I think we should be calling on the community to help us with this. I mean, we've got a shipyard. We're lucky to have a shipyard in the town. We've got a ship repair yard in the neighbouring town. We've got lots of skills in the town as well. And the biggest cost of building any new replica is labour. And I don't see why we couldn't work with our shipyards, ship repair yards, community groups, the men's shed or whatever. I mean, the previous refurbishment was a training project through the trust. So I don't see why we couldn't find a way of trying to bring that sort of community value to this project. Albeit, absolutely, undoubtedly, the council will need to put a significant amount of money in if we're going to produce a new replica. But I think the more in-kind support or direct support we can get from others, then the less the cost will be for the council. So I'd hope through the working group or the forum, whatever media we use to take this forward, I would hope we would be exploring those avenues. And I think also going forward that, and it's probably part linked to the discussion we had earlier, the Comet sitting in the centre of Port Glasgow, we're not really telling the story of the Comet that well, just sitting there. So I would like to see a way in which, as part of any new strategy for rebuilding the Comet and having it on display, that we find a way of telling the story as well. And you can do that through sort of electronic boards and things like that linked to it. So I just think we need to be creative and imaginative in terms of thinking about the future and how we best use this replica. But I do think it is important for the history of the town that we do find a way to once again restore it and put it back on display.
Thanks, Stephen. Drew?
Thanks, Mr. Convener. Yeah, I would associate myself with all the remarks they made by Councillor McCabe. Exactly. And I too would be happy to take this forward to the Port Glasgow Regeneration Forum for further discussion. It's raised a lot of interest in the town, and I think myself, like other Port Glasgow councillors, have received a lot of communication about it, and a lot of people want to express their opinions. And I've had 3 or 4 really interesting people beat their path to my door, and we've had some interesting conversations that maybe it should be rebuilt with fiberglass, it should be rebuilt with metal to make it look like wood. One interesting one was in covering it, go outside the town buildings and dig a hole in the ground and put it in and put a glass pavement on top of it, and it suddenly becomes a tourist attraction. Put boards round about it, and you're right outside Seamal's office, and it was the first ferry in the river, and get them to pay for it. And there's a lot of good suggestions coming from a lot of good people that are interested in ships. I'm talking about Murray Patterson, I'm talking about Hamish Monroe, people that are involved in the ship industry. There is a lot of affection for the Comet, and it's a token, it's a symbol of the town. What we have in just now is a replica boat with an engine in it, which is obviously seized when you look by the report. But do we really need a replica with an engine, with a working engine? What we need is an ornament, and that is a symbolic ornament of the town. And yeah, there's a lot of discussions to be made, but I'm happy to take it forward to the Port Glasgow Regeneration Forum. Thanks, Mr. Convener.
Thanks, Drew. Chris Conway.
Thank you, Convener. I suppose I think there's going to be a lot of common threads in what we're saying today at this committee, certainly from those councillors who represent parts of Port Glasgow anyway. I agree with a lot of what Stephen said. In fact, I think I've actually written it down here, what Stephen said. So I think there's a general consensus in the area. I would say this report I was not looking forward to reading. It's great reading it makes. However, I do see this as a wake-up call and a challenge as a community, and taking Stephen's point, as a community, it should be a community-led decision to actually to redevelop anything we're doing here. And of course, as elected representatives of that community, to do a better in honouring our rich shipbuilding heritage. There are a number of legitimate concerns that have been raised by other members and challenges about how the comet replica got to this stage, where despite spending large sums of money throughout its lifetime, the replica comet deteriorated so badly, especially given the part that the original comet played in the development of power sea vessels. Indeed, the importance of the comet has been recognised since its original construction, evidenced by its original engine being donated to the Science Museum in 1862. And I think that's another option for us. We need to look, I think, at a more wider scale about how we tell the story of the comet, as what do you call it, as Stephen was saying. I particularly like the link the comet has to James Watt. James Watt travelled on her in 1862. I particularly like the idea of heading down the water, seeing the sights that his engineering and technological developments had enabled, propelled by the very steam engine that he developed as well. And I think that's a story that we don't really tell enough about the comet. There is I think that this report should be taken as a catalyst for us to do better. A new comet replica could and should be part of a wider investment into the heritage of Port Glasgow. I fully expect, as Stephen said, that such investment will attract criticism given the other calls on the resources. But if we do not invest in our heritage, we are doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. So therefore, I do welcome the recommendations that the refurbishment display of the comet should be considered through the Port Glasgow Regeneration Forum. But touching upon also what Drew said, I think we should think big. And accordingly, I think we should also consider how the comet can be integrated into a wider maritime heritage offer in Port Glasgow, linking to the new shipbuilder sculpture proposed for the Coronation Park. I believe a maritime heritage centre should be our target, and looking at what we can do, we can bring in other things. As mentioned previously, the original engine is in the Science Museum. Do we not make a bid to bring that back up to Port Glasgow? We have what they call the Spencer murals. Could we maybe find a place for that? Look at how we can develop a heritage centre in Port Glasgow, concentrating on our shipbuilding. And I think there is a good opportunity, a good site in Port Glasgow. Personally, members may recollect, I've always been issued about how we develop the dry dock site. That's the first working dry dock in Scotland. It's still underneath the surface. It's right next to the town buildings. It's right next to Seamal. Is that part we can maybe integrate within how we actually develop the heritage of Port Glasgow and how we show the rich heritage, shipbuilding heritage of Port Glasgow? So a long way around of saying that I fully recommend what they call the proposals of this report.
Thanks, Chris. Rory, do you want to come in?
Yeah, please, Michael. Just a couple of general points. I mean, I think that there's no doubt this is definitely one for the Port Glasgow Regeneration Forum, as Drew and some of the other folks have said. I mean, I was really intrigued as to why the consultant's report basically included lots of information about the engine. You know, given that no one could actually see the engine, I mean, you couldn't get on top of the comet replica to have a look into it, and it was never going to sail. So I was really quite intrigued as to why they spent, you know, quite a considerable amount of time referring to the engine. But basically, Stephen's at 100% correct, because I can recall vividly that the Community Development Trust were involved with trainees and during the last refurbishment, working with Ferguson's. And I know that up at the Port Glasgow Training Centre, they did at the time produce 2 St. Ale skiffs. And for those who are really into these things, they are 100% fantastic rowing boats, basically, large ones. And they were sold for a considerable amount of money. But again, the point was, it was employability trainees working under journeymen who put those together. And I genuinely think that there could well be the opportunity again to utilise that. But I think that you guys are all heading in the right direction, and really it should be the Port Glasgow Regeneration group who should decide on how best to go forward. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Ronnie. Drew, do you want to come back in?
Mr. Convener, just one point that I didn't mention. We're all agreed that the comet's sitting there in a very sad-looking state. There is an argument that it should be removed permanently at the earliest opportunity, rather than sit there actually being an embarrassment to the town rather than a symbol. So there is an argument there that says that we should really look about maybe perhaps moving it.
Chris Collins, do you want to come
in? Thank you, Michael. Drew, I very much agree with that. I think we need to do something now to save what we can of the comet. I know my point was going to say we had a 50,000 budget that's for doing the refurbishment works. I'm just wondering whether officers can look into whether or not that's sufficient money to remove the comet from its existing locations and do an appropriate disassemble of the comet and rescue as much as we can at this point in time.
John Crowther?
Yes, I'm just going to come in very, very quickly. Been listening to everything that's said in full agreement. The only thing I would like to see is the possibility of why should the comet in its own be a kind of standalone. And I take very much in board what Councillor Curley had said. But the only thing I can see is that should we be looking at Marine Heritage Trail so that we can fit in all the other shipyards, marine engineering industries that we had within Inverclyde. That stretches from Gourock, you can say from McLean's, with Adams. We've also through the engine builders, which is Kincaid's. We have others in Ingleston Street as well, and also we had the turning gear of Hasties. So could maybe fit something in on the heritage aspect of it, and maybe have some sort of trail.
Scott, would you like to come back in and primarily address the question of moving the comet?
Thanks, convener. And I think we would need to look to see what could be done in terms of moving the vessel. The indication from the report is it would be challenging to lift it in slings like was done in 2009. So officers would need to look at that and cost it. So we can certainly take that away and look to see what we could do with the budget allocation. And then in terms of heritage trails, I mean, I think these are all things that are well worthwhile discussing within the Port Glasgow Regeneration Forum and setting a framework for how we seek to develop the project and what we can bring back to this committee.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Okay, anyone else? Well, can we agree the recommendation that the committee approves officers to work with the Port Glasgow Regeneration Forum to consider and cost options for the refurbishment and display of the comet? Okay.
And also, Michael, to officers to bring back a report on the costs for removal and dismantling of the existing.
Yeah, can that be done, Scott?
Yes, convener, I can confirm that can be done.
Okay, thank you everyone. Okay, item 13 is Transport Scotland, the project corridor options and access to Argyll and Bute on the A83. Gail?
Thank you, convener. Transport Scotland have commenced a public consultation exercise. They're requesting feedback on 11 potential project corridor options to access Argyll and Bute. This will shape the data collection for stage 1 and assessment of the options. The proposed routes are set out in 2.2 of the report, and our proposed response is set out in Appendix 1. It is anticipated that a recommendation will be received from Transport Scotland in spring 2021. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks, Gail. Any questions for Gail? Scott?
Thank you, convener. Just something to add in that we didn't know when the report was written is that Argyll and Bute have supported option 1, which is an upgrading of the existing route up the Rest and Be Thankful. We don't know what the detail of that would be, but they're supporting a simple upgrade of that route. But they're also asking that Transport Scotland look at option 7, in the longer term and in addition to the rest of the Thankful route. So just for committee's interest.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Ronnie?
Thanks, Michael. Just a very quick one. I think that some of the options that were presented here were absolutely ridiculous. And just very quickly, if you'll allow me, Michael, I'd like you to quote from the editor's note of the New Observer about the options. It says, "It seems that many of the uncosted options presented for the A83 replacement are too fantastic to merit serious consideration. This, like the last time, will leave us with the cheapest option, and I'm willing to bet that is the one that they go with." So that was dated the 25th of September, and I think the editor, Gordon Lee, was proved correct. The options were a complete and utter disgrace. Thanks, Michael.
Okay, well, okay, anyone else want to come in? No? Can we agree that sorry, Chris Curley.
Yeah, just to say, I don't think options 6 and 7 as a replacement for the A38 is really a goer, as Ronnie was saying there. The only way I could see it could possibly ever happen is if as part of the Boris Bridge to Northern Ireland, but I really don't even see that happening at all. So I think let's get a wee bit of reality about it. Let's get the A83 fixed, and I think what the officers are suggesting was saying about temporarily having an alternative route through improved ferry services in Gourock is a great approach.
Yeah.
Here, I agree absolutely 100%, Chris. And if it was some of those other options, let me tell you, there's no one here would ever live to see them.
Okay. So can we agree the recommendations in the report? Yeah. Okay, thanks. Okay, item 14 is the corporate asset management strategy refresh. Eddie Montgomery.
Thanks, Convener. The report addresses a refresh of the Council's corporate asset management strategy. This is the third edition of the strategy, and it broadly follows the same format as the previous edition, with all the content brought up to date in respect of the current corporate planning strategic documents, progress across the various asset management plans, and the financial strategies that make all of that possible. This type of live strategy document is always a snapshot in time, as it's subject to regular review and challenge through work streams such as the Directorate Change Boards and the Delivering Differently programme. I would ask that the committee note the report and approve the recommendation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks, Eddie. Stephen, do you want to come in first?
Yeah, we've probably been here before, Convener, but I'll ask the question anyway. I mean, the report and the strategy document does make mention of obviously working with other local partners, public sector partners, voluntary sector partners, whatever. But I mean, in the past, we had to sort of discussions around some sort of radical Inverclyde sort of asset management strategy where we'd be looking at co-location of services, the police co-locating with in the municipal buildings headquarters, and having a warden service and the rank and file police officers co-located. We were looking at potential co-location with Riverclyde Homes at one point as well. So it was just a challenge that are there opportunities still for us to work with our other partners through the Inverclyde Alliance, potentially to have a sort of Inverclyde Alliance asset strategy that might make more sense than individual organisations having their own asset strategy. Now, I know that we've faced challenges in the past in terms of decision-making structures within particularly national organisations like the police, but I don't know whether that we've missed the boat or whether there still are those opportunities that we could look at.
Okay, Stephen, thanks. Scott, do you want to come in on that?
Thanks, Convener. Yes, we did discuss the accommodation strategy with Riverclyde Homes, and we looked at opportunity to try to deco share, for instance, with Riverclyde Homes and office share. It is difficult because you get two organisations running in two different timelines. I think a positive outcome for Riverclyde Homes was they moved into premises in an arm's length regeneration company, which worked for us and worked for them. I think the police, again, the challenge is they've got a national strategy and how we interact with it. So I think the answer is yes, there's always opportunities and the door's always open to discuss things, but delivery is always challenging because you get organisations running with different budgets and different timelines, and also, of course, different objectives.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Any other member? No, can we agree? What's in the report, the recommendations? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Item 15 and 15A are for noting. Anything to add to them, Scott? No. Okay, item 16 under, sorry, that's the end of the public business. If we can ask the members of the press, etc., to leave at this juncture.